Sorry about the playing. We didn't realize that was not playing. So as you move items around on the screen, you'll see that what you get is a dynamically drawn blue guides that let you know alignment, sizing, and various other important things. So some of the tools that you can use are to align on text baselines, center lines, layout guides, inter-object spacing, and showing size of objects. For those of you who have worked with tools such as OmniGraffle, you'll be familiar with these tools because they're familiar from other drawing style programs. This is a major advancement and allows setting up of layouts in a much more rapid time frame than in prior versions of FileMaker. The next thing are what we call Dragout Guides, and they're very useful because in the past we had a single T-square. Now what we have is an unlimited number of guides that we can pull out from the ruler. If you see here the ruler, you can drag the guides out, and then we can set how the guides behave. And so some of the important choices are, is the guide shared on all layouts or is it customized? The ones you see here that are in pink are shared among layouts. The ones that are in blue are local. We can also lock our guides, and we can also remove our guides. And the way we get to this little pop-up menu is by right-clicking on a guide, and I'll show you that later in our demo. The other thing that's nice is that you can control the visibility of the guides, but you can also show whether or not you have a snap-to behavior, meaning that you can turn on or turn off snap-to behavior with the guides. The next feature that I'd like to review with you is the new customizable layout grid. This grid's a very important tool, especially when you're doing early design, trying to figure out the screen geometry for your application. The first thing to know is that it's integrated with the ruler and that there's only one ruler now. It's the same ruler for both graphic and text, and that ruler is set in your inspector, and any default you set there integrates both with the ruler as well as with the layout grid. There's some visual and behavior changes which I'll review, which have to do with how the geometry of the screen is actually being calculated. One of the nice new settings also is that there are both minor and major levels of grid control. So what we can do is say, okay, how many specific measures fall into a major control, and you can divide that up into minor breakouts as well, and I'll show you how to do that again in the demo. The other thing that's nice is that the grid now changes dynamically. It's colored based on what theme you're using, or basically whatever background fill you have on the layout part. And so they're always pretty easy to see and use. Another thing to be aware of is that points have replaced pixels as the measure, and what that really means is as we move into a world such as with the iPad 3, where you have extremely high screen resolution, pixel essentially was meaning it was an old term meaning a dot on a screen, and what's happened is that no longer has a true representation of size. And so keeping in standard with other graphic programs, FileMaker has moved from describing the smallest measure, which is a 72nd of an inch, from being a pixel to being a point, and that actually allows us to rely more steadily on a constant measurement standard. The other thing that's interesting is that you can actually have a fraction of a point, which didn't used to be the case at all. Just one of the questions will come up is where can you set these things, and in addition to a view menu, which I'll show you, you can also use the inspector to set your grid size. When you first set up FileMaker, the default size come in 3 choices, just as they do now: English, metric, and points, what used to be called pixels. And you now have settings for major, minor, and nudge factor, and all of these can be customized. I mentioned earlier that there's a new screen geometry, and that screen geometry is based upon using the edge of the layout as your 0, 0 point, as opposed to the edge of the paper as it was in FileMaker 11 and before. So one of the advantages of this is that our rulers are much more consistent. So if you look down below here at the 2 examples, you'll see that I set a print margin of 50 points, and what you'll see in FileMaker 11, my ruler started at the 50 mark. And so if you look on here, you see that there's only 5 available. Whereas in FileMaker 12, with the same setting of 50 pixels, you see that the 0, 0 point is in the top left-hand corner in both cases of my actual layout. So some of our measurements will change from before, but they'll also become more consistent. Something to be aware of, and something that I saw a lot of when I was prepping for this demo, was in playing with your snap to behavior. You have to be aware that you now have 3 different things that can be used for snap to. You've got your underlying dynamic, sorry, not dynamic, but customized grid. You've got your dynamic guides, which we talked about, and you've also got your layout guides, the pull-out guides that we talked about. And so we have to be aware that if all 3 of these are turned on, you may get some very strange, erratic snap to behavior. But the good news is that using the view menu, you can control all 3. So you can turn on or off dynamic guides. You have the opportunity to show the pull-out guides and choose to whether or not you snap to them. And you can do exactly the same thing with the grid. But being aware of that is important. And if you find yourself working with a layout and are not getting the behavior you're expecting, go to the view menu and make sure that the settings are the way you think. One of the opportunities, I think, for the future is that snap to behavior does not have any visuals for either the grid or the guides, so you're not really aware of whether that is turned on or not. Another major advance that makes FileMaker feel more consistent with other drawing programs is that you now have selection handles, which are really quite different from before. And I'll show this in the demo section. But essentially what you find is that as you select multiple things, the selection handles change. We've also added both a vertical and a horizontal handle, so it makes it easier to resize things. Also, there's an inspector change, which allows us now to resize all the parts. If you, for example, have a common-sized element, you can resize them individually by selecting them all and then putting in a dimension. And before, that function did not work that way. The other thing they've done is they've added much better indication of locked objects so you can see them. And you also have the advantage now that you can actually see items. Handles are visible even when they are buried by another object. One of the nicest new features is the multi-level undo. Now we have essentially unlimited undo and redo features, so you can actually experiment with the layout, and you have a wonderful opportunity to both take things apart and put them back together again. And you have up to 1,000 operations, which is, for most practical purposes, is fairly unlimited. And I think this is a real advantage because it allows you to play with layouts and go back to specific rollback points. Before, we only had one rollback, and once you saved it, you were done. Whereas now you might have gone further than you wanted with your edits. Now you can go back and adjust that. Be aware, however, that when you change things, your rollback is closed. And what first is if you save the layout, that means whether or not you go to browse mode or whether you just hit the save button. When you switch to another layout or when you switch to another mode, that essentially undoes all of your undo capabilities. So be aware of that. The other thing to be aware of is that the text undo behavior, which was already introduced in FileMaker 11, continues and is not changed. So we're really just talking about a change in the layout mode undo behavior. The final feature that I'll be covering today are screen stencils. And what these are is these are just handy guides that are non-binding. They simply present on the screen a predefined layout that allows you to easily design for a device such as an iPad or an iPhone or various desktop resolutions. You also have the ability to make one customized size. So you can make any size that you choose. And you can choose to show all or none of these at any given time. So it's a really nice little tool if you, for example, have an application that you then want to be able to add capabilities for an iPad. It can be done quite readily without having to test it first on the iPad to see that your screen resolution is correct. So I'd like to go now to the demos, and I'll just show you some of these things actually in live mode. So I'm going to switch over to FileMaker. And what I have here is this is FileMaker 12, and I just have a basic layout that I've been playing with, and I want to show you the various capabilities of the new tools. If I go into layout mode, the first thing I want to show you is the is the grid system. And usually this would be the first thing that one would choose to play with. So if I go into here and I go into my position, I now have the ability to adjust my grid. So I'm just going to turn this off. And if you see down at the bottom of the inspector, I have my grid setting. And here I come in here, and I have two behaviors that I can play with. One is show grid, the other one is snap to grid. But I also have the ability to set what my major spacing is. So if I turn on my grid, you can see immediately that on the layout, I have this very handy, nicely done, with major and minor differences, should be allowing me to be able to adjust my grid settings. So if I, for example, change that to 8, you can see that the minor grids change their size. If I change it to, say, 2, it'll cut it in half. And I can also go up to very high resolution. For instance, I could go up to 36, and that would give me a very fine grid that would be, very difficult to work with, but might be suitable for a precision layout or something of that nature that you might need that degree of refinement. So this is a very important tool, and it also allows me to turn on snap to behavior, which is very useful for setting up layouts and layout grids. Now, one of the things I wanted to show you was some of the cool tools. So I'm going to turn off my snap to behavior there, and I'm going to come up to my view menu. I mentioned that we have control over various things. The first thing to know is that to use several of these new tools, you want to have your rulers enabled. So I've already got that done. And you'll see that I don't have my grid switched on in either mode. And I don't have my guides switched on in either mode. But I do have my dynamic guides turned on. And what that allows me to do is, oops, I got a locked item there. But I'll go to one that's not locked. And what you'll see is as I move things around, I immediately get this wonderful behavior where I can see immediately what my placement is. So you can see that I'm aligning things, I can space things, I can also do things to resize. If I want to resize here and I want to come up and I want to match the existing size, I can do that. And this is a tool that really dramatically increases your ability to work dynamically with your layouts. The other thing that is kind of neat is, I really didn't want my layout to work like that, so I can use my multiple undo and I go straight back to where I was. The cool thing is I can also do a redo, so I can make changes and roll back and forth. However, as soon as I save this layout or change modes, then that behavior goes away. Now I wanted to point out, I mentioned that I would be in this session covering a case study of something that we worked on, and I will show that to you in just a minute. And to do that, one of the major things we did was we first came in here, and I worked with Heather Winkle of FileMaker, who was really very helpful to me because I wanted to get some idea of some of the purpose behind some of these new tools, not to purely view it as a technical exercise, but rather say what's some of the advantage that can really be done. And I had seen a session that Heather gave up in Boston, and I was so impressed by some of the new design directions that FileMaker is taking that I contacted her, and she has helped me to do this before and after demo that I'll show you. So anyway, one of the cool tools that is available for us is to use some sort of a grid pattern that allows us to set up standardized columns within our layouts. And the specific size that we settled on is basically a pattern that is 48 pixels. If you see down here in this little guy over here, what we've done is we've drawn, let me see if I can go in on this a little closer. What we've done is we've drawn a 6-pixel wide white box, a 36, oh sorry, I say pixel, point, I have to get my new language, 36-point wide box and a 6-point wide box. And this makes a total of 48. And what that means is that for every 3 of these columns in our layout, we have an alignment which is exactly with our grid. And what this does is for the size of layout that we are working with, it gives us exactly 24 columns that we can use as a design tool for making our layout more graphically effective. So what I'd like to do is show you the before. And here we go. So I go and B, and here is our before. So this is just a fictitious company. We set this up just as a way to get a sense of an application. What this is a simple parts tool, and what it does is it tracks customized parts for customers. And one of the things that I won't get into today, but is obviously extremely important when we're doing design work, is to make sure that we really have a keen understanding of what our user requirements are. I'm not getting into that today, but that's not because I don't think it's important. It's simply in respecting of the time and scope of the presentation today. So what we did was we came in and using the columns that I showed you earlier, we came in with what we call a column planner. And what this is those are the same 24 columns that I showed you before. And if you noticed in our original application, it was essentially a 3-column design. I'll go back to it quickly just so you can see it. You see we have on the left, we've got our part. In the middle, we've got our part information. On the right, we've got our picture. So we essentially saw that this was a 3-column design, and so we decided to come in and looking at the various choices of column widths, we chose this one in the center, which is basically 276 points on the left, 564 in the middle, and 276 on the right. And this is those same columns that we set up using using the grid. So I go into layout mode. One of the things I can do now is I can come into my view menu and turn on my guides. So I'm going to show my guides, and you'll see that I don't have too many guides at this point set up, but I've got a wonderful grid tool that I can use to set up these guides. So what I start doing is dragging these in, and because I want these to apply across the application, I'm going to turn on their global setting. I'll do this last one. What this now does is it gives me a template that I can use across my layouts to kind of tap into this column guide planner. And what I can do now is I don't have to really come back to this often, but I can do so if I should need to during my design process. And now we come over and we take a look at our original form. I don't know what that was. And what you'll see is that the guide is not particularly well lined up with my existing layout. So what we did is we took this layout and we repurposed it, and we put it into a new format. And now you can see that we've used the guides plus some local guides that we've added to essentially manage the alignment of all the different components on this layout. So that you now see that the 3 parts are aligned to the guides. We've also added vertical guides and local guides that allowed us to actually manage the parts of this layout. So I'm going to turn off my guides so we no longer see them. And I'm also going to turn off my grid so we no longer see it. And now we get this new layout that is much more balanced in its nature than the original one. And we've been able to use these guides at all levels to give us a very, very consistent layout among the different parts in our, the various components of our layout, both visually and horizontally. So we think this is a really powerful new tool and something that I think gives you a significantly better layout quality. Obviously, we also benefit from the new themes, which were covered in session 1 of the FM Academy. But obviously, these are just a wonderful new capability that we have to manage how our stuff looks and how we can monitor our look of our system. Just to go back, just to show you what a difference, and I must say, as I found myself working more and more with FileMaker 12, I found it harder and harder to go back to the original because it kind of looks kind of primitive by comparison. And so I think this is something that we can really be proud of and happy that we've got to use now. So then I'd like to do one last thing, which is we mentioned before that there are these new stencils that we can work with. And those are really a valuable tool for seeing various layout settings that we can use to design layouts. I'm going to turn off my inspector. And I'm going to, the setting is for it is right over here. And here I can turn that on, and then I can select which sorts of layouts do I want. So I can, for instance, do And it's maybe a little hard to see, but you can see this little orange line that shows up. And I can turn on as many of these as I want. I can make one over here. But I think some of the more valuable tools, obviously, are to be able to do something, for instance, for an iPhone in its vertical state, or an iPad in its portrait state. And I can come in, and I also have the nice ability to customize the size, so I can choose any particular size that I might want. I've made a 500 by 500 just for demo purposes. Now, one thing I wanted to show you that in doing using these stencils for actual redesign work is I wanted to actually take this and adapt the layout quickly for use in the iPad. So what I did, one of the things that is an important thing to understand is that some of the persistence of things like guides, especially global guides, is carried over to a file. And so for the sake of this demo, what I did is I created a duplicate file that I could use to resize for the iPad. And it may be something to consider as you're designing systems, that there may be a good argument for separation for different device types. If nothing else, then you can set up these grids and guides and have them persistent for your application and have them different for different types of devices. So I'm going to go over to this exactly the same tool, but it's now being formatted for the iPad. And what I did here is I used the stencil the same way, and you can see and if you notice, the stencils, by the way, are persistent to the application, not to the file. But they don't have any behavior change. They simply give you an outline to work with. I'm going to turn those guys off. And I've just got the iPad, and we have a little bit of a screen real estate limitation, but you can see that what I've done is I've created exactly the same column strategy that we had in for the other desktop layout, but what we've done is I've adapted it, and I've adapted the size of the columns. And remember, you can use from anywhere from one to many columns. That's really under your control. And the idea is that these channels, these white channels, are used to separate your text from your content, and also to break the overall screen design up into various components. So if I come in here, I did this. We selected 180, 276, and 180. I grabbed a couple of fields, and what I now have is the ability to adapt that. And I used the Onyx Touch stencil, which automatically resized things, and I just simply went in here and played around. And if I use my guides, I can turn them on. I'll go back to I'll turn on my guides. By the way, there are shortcuts for turning on guides, which you can look up in the menu. I won't try and get you to remember what those are, but we can come in here and we can set up these guides the same way we did before. And of course, I'm only using horizontal, but of course you can do this with vertical guides as well. And I'll turn these guys on as global. And just to show it, I didn't show it earlier, but just to show, you can also lock guides. And when you lock a guide, they turn black, and then they're unmovable. And then I can come back into my other demo and look in the iPad, and now you see how the guides are actually used. And I can go back and forth between my tool, and I can, for instance, come in here, draw another guide over here for the use of knowing what my right-hand side is going to be. And I can make that global as well. And I can come back in here, the iPad, and now you see that I've got this really useful tool and the ability to really change how that works. And I'll go into browse mode, and this is not a complete layout. This is simply and there is an iPad layout. And that was done with it took me just a matter of minutes to be able to do that. And I found that these new tools were extremely helpful. So anyways, that's the end of our demo, and now we'd like to go back and take a look at some questions and see if any questions came in while we were doing our presentation.
Thank you, John. Our first question that came in, actually, before we head back over. Okay, if you could pop that open for me. Here we go. Okay, first questions are all about the screen not being visible at the beginning, so we'll skip over those. Okay, our first real question is, what were the keyboard shortcuts you were using to do the undo and redo when you were showing that on the layout?
Okay, so let's give that answer. The Command Z, it will do the undo, and the Command Shift Z will do the redo. So obviously on a Windows platform that would be a Control key. So it would be a Control Z and Shift Control Z to redo, and that's obviously a very useful thing. Can you scroll down the questions? Yeah, let me just. I want to change. I wanted to go to the other app.
Okay.
How do I do that? Okay, good. I just want to make sure I get the same. Okay, no problem. Sorry for that.
Okay, so our next question is when you were setting up the grids and the guides and the snapping changes, I can't seem to find the snap to commands in the inspector. Where were you making those changes?
Those snap to are all controlled in the view menu. And I'm not going to switch back and forth because we have some geometry issues when we switch back and forth. But it's all in the view menu. So if you go down to the base of the view menu, you will very quickly be able to see all of the settings that pertain to the three different controls I was showing, which are the dynamic guides, the grid, and the pull-out guides.
Okay. The next question we have, is there a place where we can download the column guide planners you are using?
Yes, there is a site that the idea comes from. I specifically got this, and that is the 960 grid system. And that is, I believe their website is 960.gs. And that we'll put some information on our blog so that we can give you some of the reference points. But it is a system that was adapted and is extremely useful, as you can see.
The next one is, do you have any hints for creating iPad and iPhone layouts in a new solution?
Well, actually, the idea is, I think, first of all, to use that column setting and just also to make the connection that the next FM Academy presentation is going to be on FileMaker Go. So I highly recommend you attend that. That'll be with Kurt Bowman, who's going to be presenting. And that is going to be on this Thursday at 2 o'clock. So if you're not signed up for that, or I guess you get signed up automatically, that's certainly worth attending. But essentially, what I found is the sequence of events was first turn on your grid, set up your columns, use those to set up your guides, turn off your grid snapping at that point, and then use your guides and your dynamic settings to be able to space and position objects on the screen.
You may want to switch back to FileMaker for this next question, John, but the question is, they would like to know how the Shift key works with multiple selected items and dragging items, and that change that has happened.
Okay, let me show that. Okay. All right, so let me go back to FileMaker. I'm going to go back to my original demo file, and I'm going to change to the layout tools. Okay, so let me show that. So if I go into the layout now, you notice that as I hit the Shift key, so I'm holding my Shift key, I've got a lock and I've got an unlock. Now it's interesting. You'll notice that it didn't allow me to select the locked item, although it did highlight the fact that I would have selected it. But on all these other ones that are not locked, any one that I do, the handles automatically move, and I can then move and resize things. So let me just drag this over here, and notice how I can resize, and each item within the group. For back in FileMaker 11, if you did with resizing of layouts, it's a similar behavior that the objects actually travel together. And something also I didn't show you, but I can show, which is useful. Oops. And let's just go into my inspector, and let's also point out that I can take this and I can size these individually. I can make them any size I want, and it'll handle them individually as opposed to handling them as a group. So if I go to 22, for example, and hit Enter, each of these become 22 pixels, or excuse me, points high. So there's some new behaviors that way that I think are really pretty cool. And again, which is really neat, is I can undo all this very quickly.
Thank you, John. We have one more question, that is, will these slides be available for download? And the short answer for that is this whole presentation should be available on YouTube within the next 2 or 3 days. And if you follow, we're going to hop back into the PowerPoint now.
Okay.
So we can show the next slide. Sorry, we got a little distracted. We had a computer failure just before the presentation. We're trying to work off the same computer over each other's shoulders. So if you follow us on Twitter, we will be tweeting when the presentation is available, as well as on our blog. That's where we'll post information about where those guides were available, people were asking about. So we'll get that all up there. We'd like to thank everybody for coming. I want to remind everybody that the next session 4 in the 12 Days of FileMaker Pro 12 will be on this Thursday, and Kirk Bowman from Mighty Data will be showing off the new and improved FileMaker Go. And please stay signed up. You should get your invitation to come to that. And have a nice day, everybody.
Thank you.